And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time this evening just sort of going through this concept of conservation in general, and maybe gauging it in the context of the past and maybe some time around the present and where we go in the future. And the past was a very tumultuous time. You know, lots of bad things happening as far as animals were concerned. There was land being created, land being broken down. There was species that were created and species that went extinct. There was all kinds of things happening. It probably wasn't a very good time to be an animal in the early days of this planet. But importantly, when it comes to looking at marine creatures such as dugongs, turtles, that sort of thing, what characterized the early days, certainly in the last sort of 500,000 years or so, is the concept of sea level rise. And a lot of people have said, oh, you know, if the sea level rises, the sea turtle beaches will disappear and they won't have anywhere to lay eggs. And I kind of think, well, they've been here for 100 million years. You would have thought they would have figured that out. And they have, indeed. As you can see from this little graph, all it says is sea level rise has gone up and down. That's all you need to take away from that. Don't worry about counting how far it went up and down. But if it went up and down by more than 5,000 meters or 5 meters, right, that was quite a big amount. So when you look at the seagrass beds that dugongs rely on, the ones that they're feeding on now weren't there 10,000 years ago. And they probably were there 10,000 years before that. And they probably weren't there 10,000 years before that. But they've been coming and going over time. Right? There have been times when Sri Lanka was joined to the Indian continent. Well, guess what? There were no dugongs feeding there at that time. I can tell you that for a fact. And at that point, when the deep waters came very, very close, there probably weren't very many dugongs around at all. And so the concept of the numbers of dugongs and where they're distributed has a lot to do with the fact that sea level has gone up and down, and that has guided distribution. So as we look at climate change in the years to come, we have to keep in mind that there is a whole history with these species, that they've learned to adapt to these things. Now our job is to try and make sure that there aren't a whole bunch of other threats they face that they have to adapt to at the same time. I'd be willing to say that turtles, dugongs, many marine organisms are going to deal with climate change just fine. If the sea level rises, they'll be, well, we'll find somewhere else to lay eggs, or we'll find other seagrass beds to go and feed on. What we can do is try and minimize some of those threats as we go along. So the whole point about this was just basically to say, look, in the past, things were very, very crazy and probably very stable. A lot of species evolved and got to where they are today. They probably continue to evolve as we speak, and will continue to evolve probably long after we're gone. And oh look, there's a dugong class, just there, little baby thing. How could you not want to marry one of these guys or ladies? So you know, there has been all of this instability, and it's brought us up till today, up to human times. And humans have had quite an impact. I think you'll all agree that we're pretty lousy at looking after the planet. We've been pretty lousy about it probably over the last 50 years, and prior to that we never really thought about it. And now today we find ourselves having to really think about how we look after the planet and what we do about it. I just was reminded briefly as I looked at this picture and you know how I really want to marry one of these animals, but about the value of those seagrass beds that they're living in. And I'll come back to that later on, because you can actually translate a lot of that into monetary terms as well. And we talked about how they're valuable to the seafood industry. I think Sri Lanka's domestic seafood industry is worth several million US dollars. The export market is worth a lot more than that. But a lot of that is made up with deep sea tuna and that sort of thing. But there is a monetary value that can be linked to making sure, you could say dugongs equal this amount of money because they require a certain amount of seagrass beds, which gives us a certain amount of biological feedback. But anyway, having said all of that about the past, you know, this is a very good example of how bad we are about looking after the planet in the present day. This is somebody that's using dynamite to fish on a reef. This is in the Philippines. It's not in Sri Lanka. It's okay. I didn't come spying. But I understand it happens even here. And this sort of thing is one of those where it's somebody taking the easy way out. Right? This is somebody that probably used to fish with a hook and line or a net or something like that in the past. And today it's much easier to just take a bone and throw it over the side. I've dealt with a number of these glass fishermen, and I've actually been out with them on their boats and talked to them about the rationale. And one guy said to me, he says, look, and I put it in dollar terms because it wasn't in dollar terms, but he says, if I go out and fish with a hook and line all day long, I'll be lucky if I come back with $2 or $3 worth of fish. But it only cost me 60 cents to make a bomb, and I get like $10 a fish out of it. And that was the thinking. Right? I said, well, yeah, but when you do this, you blow up the reef and nothing will grow on there. He goes, that's okay, I'll just move afterwards. And this is a concept that is alien to many of us. You know, when we're done with what we're used to, well, we'll just go and move. Right? How many of you could move home easily tomorrow? Yeah, not really, right? All those things to pack, right? All those pictures to take off the walls, and the television and the fridge and the whatever. Right? All those things that we have to worry about. And these guys live in a little shack on the beach, and when the reef in front of their beach is done, they just get in their boats and move and live somewhere else. And it's a very, very different lifestyle. Anyway, when we look at this, you sort of think to yourself, wow, where is the planet headed? What are we doing to the planet, and what can we do about saving it? Obviously, we haven't been very good at what we do. And personally, I think that conservation hasn't been very good at what it does. Certainly in the last 20, 30 years, we've been investing billions of US dollars globally in conservation. The estimate at the moment is something like $6 billion a year gets spent on conservation. And do you really see a lot of species being brought back from the brink of extinction? Do you really see major tracts of habitat being rehabilitated? And I would argue that probably not. I really don't think that we've been very good at conservation over the years. And I think a lot of it is a learning mentality, it's a mental process. But there is definitely a requirement for change, a huge change, because we're just not good at it. You know, the conservation programs of the past, in many ways, we're just counting programs. Now we'll go out and count the turtles. This is a good one. I know turtles really well. But Dugongs is the same thing. We'll go out and count them. Right? Okay, we've got 100 this year. Well, that's really good. Next year we've got 100. Great. Next year we've got 70. Okay, good. The next year we've got 60. Oh, man, not so good. Okay. The next year we've got 55. Look at that. We keep on counting them until they're gone. And we never do anything about it. You know, we think we do something about it, but do we really have a measurable impact on turning species trends around? And I would say, for the most part, no. Now, we've been really good at a couple of things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the entire world is going to be lost, but in reality, we haven't been very good. I'm going to show you a graph for a place in Malaysia. This is nesting data for an endangered sea turtle. And all you really need to see is that back in the early 50s, there was a whole bunch of them. And then down in 2000, there was very few. Last year, there was 0. The year before, there was 1. The year before that, there were 2. The year before that, there was 0. This year so far, 0. But then we're only up to halfway through month 1. So all I'm getting at is that we watched this population go extinct. Can you believe that? We just sat and watched it and counted it and counted it and counted it. But there it is, gone. Yeah. You hit it when it happens. Right? The dugong is a very close relative of the Steller's sea cow, which is the one classic example on the planet of mankind completely eliminating a species from the ocean. Right? We even know who and when, who killed and when he killed the very last one. You imagine having that to go to bed with every night. I was the guy who killed the very last dugong on the planet. That would be terrible. Can you imagine that? But that's the thing. You know, we're quite good at counting them and counting them and counting them until they're gone. In the Malaysian case, it was even more. It was a compounded comedy of errors, if you were. In the early days, what happened was the Malaysian government leased parts of the beach to egg collectors. You can go and collect eggs. And off they went and they collected eggs. And in the very early days, in fact, prior to World War II, the villagers would collect maybe a clutch of eggs, and you know, I'd have some, and I'd give some to my mother-in-law, because if not, she whacked me on the head very fine. I would probably share some with other relatives and that sort of thing. But it wasn't a big, huge number of eggs being taken. After World War II, the advent of refrigeration, roads, the opening up of markets in places where markets never existed, all of a sudden, instead of taking one clutch of eggs, we took every clutch of eggs. Every single one. Every single egg. Well, it doesn't really take a genius to figure out that if you take every egg and you don't put any babies back in the sea, you're not going to get very many adults coming back in later years. But the Malaysian government quite happily just let this happen. And it happened, and it happened, and it happened. And then, just after 1982, they went, oh, we have a problem. Because you can see where the population was by then, right? And they went, oh dear, we have a problem. So they came up with this wonderful initiative where they told all the fishermen, all the villagers, that all of those of you who collect eggs have to sell back to us 10% of them. And we're going to raise them in a hatchery and make sure they live. So a turtle typically will lay around 100 eggs in a clutch. And some fisheries department guy said, no, you sell back 10%, and that's going to save this. I say, what idiot decided, excuse my French, decided that 10% of eggs was going to be enough? A sea turtle lays 100 eggs for a reason, right? Do you think a sea turtle would lay 100 if she could just lay 10? Right? Of course not. Nobody goes through all that trouble. That's way too much effort. Right? So evolutionarily, a sea turtle is laying that number of eggs because, hey, that's what's required to deal with, you know, natural mortality, predators, this, that, and the other. But some wise guy at the Malaysian Fisheries Department decided, 10% should be fine. Okay, so then they put them in a hatchery to raise them. And you can picture this, right? The guys who work for the Fisheries Department is because they couldn't get a job anywhere else. And they certainly didn't have a PhD in turtle egg raising. How many of you have a good knowledge of raising turtle eggs in a hatchery? No, good. Well, that's just as much knowledge as they had. So out of that 10% of eggs, only 2%, only 20% of those survived. So out of 100 eggs, we took 10 and we put them in a hatchery. But out of those 10, because we were so bad at looking after them, only 2 survived. And then, to make it even worse, because they raised them all at the wrong temperatures, both of those 2 were females. Right? So now tell me, right, first, hey, let's let everybody collect all the eggs forever. And then, when we do see a problem, let's come up with some really out of wacky idea, like, 10% will be fine. Right? Okay, great. Then let's not be very good at looking after them. Only 2 survive. They're both female. What a pity. They'll never reproduce. Right? How to cause the extinction of a species. Mankind is damn good at it. And we do it time and time again for one species or another. Right? I'm just hoping that we don't do it to dugongs. We have a chance, right? We have the opportunity and we have a lot more knowledge today.